Corner 1 there. It's right there. A young man with long brown hair and a pirate-like bandana shouted as he pointed at a nearby island. He was standing on the starboard of a three-masted sailboat. The rolling waves drowned out most of his voice. A muscular man with a black eye patch reached out to hold the ship. He frowned and muttered to himself in shock and suspicion. I don't remember there being such an island on this sea route. This was not the first time their ship had plied this sea route. The young man who had shouted replied excitedly, this means that it's usually hidden. It only appears at specific moments. There must be treasures on such an island. Captain, in the words of that strange monk, a fortuitous opportunity has presented itself. He spoke in the lone language. Fortuitous opportunity was a term pieced together by two words. That monk spouts words indecipherable to us. Pay no heed to them. The muscular man wearing an eye patch raised his hand and ruffled his slightly messy short yellow hair. And I often tell you guys that treasures are often accompanied by danger. As he spoke, he pointed at his right eye, which was covered by the eye patch. That's the cost. The young man with the pirate-like bandana sincerely said, but Captain, isn't this the purpose of our adventure? For treasure. They were a group of treasure hunters from different places. Of course, they occasionally worked as pirates and borrowed food, drinks, and necessities from passing merchant ships. After all, ideals alone couldn't feed them. The captain fell silent for a moment before saying, gather 4 to 5 people, and we'll step foot on the island to take a look. The rest of you, prepare to set sail at any time. The young man's eyes lit up. You agreed. Captain, you agreed. The captain chuckled. Weimer, if not for the fact that there's no other choice, no one at my age would continue to be a treasure hunter. He appeared to be in his 30s, but his blue eyes showed signs of age. Fine. Weimer held up his hands. Whatever you say. He immediately became excited. Teal, get Al-Keaton. Al-Keaton was the ship's first mate. He believed in the god of knowledge and wisdom, and had mastered many languages. If they didn't bring him along on such an expedition, it was very likely that they would throw away whatever treasures they found as trash. More importantly, Al-Keaton was also very strong. When the ship docked at the dock that seemed to have long been abandoned, an exploration team of 4 had already gathered beside the gangway. They were Captain Gray, First Mate Al-Keaton, Bosun Parvy, and veteran Seaman Weimer. No one. Parvy looked into the distance and muttered regretfully. The weather in the Berserk Sea today wasn't bad. Visibility was extremely high under the blue sky, and the small port hid no secrets from her. This place was incomparably quiet, as if it had been dead for many years. It'll be more terrifying if there were people, Weimer added. It implied many things if such a hidden island remained inhabited. Parvy was wearing a white shirt and brown pantaloons. She had a pair of beautiful light blue eyes and a slightly androgynous appearance. She glared at Weimer. You want to stay behind and clean the deck. Weimer shrugged and shut his mouth. Having become a bosun as a woman, she needed to manage many unruly crew members. She would never go easy on her threats. Captain Gray, who was surveying the area, gave an order. Let's get ashore. He then exhorted, we'll do it the old way. During the first exploration, don't touch anything. Just look and listen. No problem. Weimer was the first to rush out of the ship and run down the gangway to the dock. He jumped up excitedly mid-run and glided to the ground like a big bird. The sound caused by his action spread out in all directions, mixed with some echo. Behind him, Gray, Al-Keaton, and Parvy followed carefully. If you continue that recklessness of yours and act on your own like an uncivilized wild dog, I'll tie you up and hang you at the stern to fish for sharks. Parvy quickly walked to Weimer's side and warned him in a hushed voice. Weimer nodded solemnly and muttered, Girl boss, with your personality, you should join the Church of Storms instead of believing in the Evernight goddess. Parvy didn't say anything. She looked around and followed Captain Gray and First Mate Al-Keaton. The port was not big. There was only a lighthouse, 2 simple docks, 5 warehouses, and a few buildings that served as a hotel, restaurant, bar, and police station. It did not take long for the 4 of them to circle the area. Apart from the fact that there was no one around, everything seemed normal. Weimer looked at the tables in the house, facing the street through a relatively clear glass window, and did not speak for a long time. His expression was a little solemn, given his personality. Inside the house, on the dining table, there was a cup with brownish-black liquid and 2 pieces of moldy toast. Next to them were several neatly folded newspapers. It looked like the owner was about to enjoy breakfast when he suddenly encountered an emergency and had to leave in a hurry. He did not even have time to flip open the newspapers. He never returned. It would be considered normal if there was only one such example. After all, accidents were unavoidable. However, the entire port was in a similar situation. It was inevitable that it would make one's hair stand on end and imagination run wild. In that instant, all the local residents know, all the living creatures seem to have evaporated. They haven't been gone for long. Captain Gray's slightly hoarse voice broke the team's silence. Parvy subconsciously replied, "Indeed, if this port has been abandoned for a long time, the food will not just be moldy." It seemed like only a few days or weeks had passed since the bizarre incident had happened. Al-Keaton retracted his gaze from the street and nodded gently. "That's what the plants here say." There were obvious wrinkles at the corners of the first mate's mouth. His hair was already mottled with natural curls. He was wearing a white robe and brass-framed glasses. Weimer was momentarily slow to react. He then looked at the place where Al-Keaton had sized up and quickly understood why he said that. There weren't many weeds in the harbor. There were some plain or gorgeous mushrooms growing sporadically on the wooden building. They seemed to have existed all along. The natural world had obviously not had enough time to invade this place. Al-Keaton saw Weimer's enlightened expression and didn't explain further. He turned to Captain Gray and solemnly said, "I'm worried that something might happen if we stay here for too long." "What might happen? Could it be that we will also disappear into thin air?" Before Weimer could finish speaking, a tan palm appeared over his mouth. This palm pushed his head and pressed him against the wall. "There won't be a next time." Parvy glared at Weimer and warned under her breath. Weimer nodded with difficulty, indicating that he understood. When Parvy released him, he muttered softly, "This isn't like you, girl boss." "You actually didn't slam the back of my head against the wall," Parvy chuckled. "I'm afraid that the commotion will be too great and awaken up the bizarreness hidden here." Captain Gray didn't care about their little bout. He took out his silver-white pocket watch and opened the lid. "We'll return to the ship in another 15 minutes. If everything remains normal, we'll prepare a second exploration tomorrow." "All right." Weimer was the first to agree. The four of them maintained a fine battle formation as they skirted the buildings in front of them and headed for the edge of the port. There was a slightly stained steam locomotive parked here. The two tracks extended deep into the island. Parallel to the tracks was a cement road. This was exactly what Gray and the others had imagined. After all, the port bore the responsibility of loading and unloading goods, traveling passengers, and connecting other towns with convenient road traffic. However, to their surprise and confusion, the railway was only 1 to 200 meters long. At the end of it stood a sizable town. Even though they were still at the edge of the port, the four of them could see the situation there with their naked eye. Weimer could not express his feelings in words. He could only curse under his breath. "If I were the owner of this island, I would definitely tie up the bastard who suggested such repairs at the stern to fish for sharks." Based on their experience in many ports, this arrangement was simply abnormal. The town 100 meters away had to be closer and connected to this side to form a port city, or it should be a few kilometers away and be independent, unlike now. "There might be a deeper meaning," Al-Keaton said with a frown. "This might have something to do with the bizarre happenings here." After he finished speaking, no one responded for a moment. After a few seconds, Weimer looked at the town not far away and said, "Captain, do we head over to take a look?" Captain Gray nodded. "Sure. 12 minutes left." They then walked along the cement road toward the small town. On both sides of the road, weeds flourished and mushrooms dotted the area. The closer they got to their destination, the more it was like this. Before long, the four treasure hunters arrived at the edge of the town. There was a wooden board erected there. On it was a word written in Loan, Utopia. "This place is called Utopia," Weimer muttered to himself as he cast his gaze at Al-Keaton. Al-Keaton shook his head slowly, indicating that he had never heard of it. It was the same for Parvy and Captain Gray. They observed the situation inside from the edge of the town and confirmed that the streets were also empty. It was so quiet that even the wind seemingly found it unbearable to pass. As they walked forward step by step, the four of them saw the Iris Hotel, Utopia's telegraph office, and many buildings. However, without exception, the interior of these buildings revealed that their owners had left in a hurry and never returned. There were also cups with some water left, dry clothes that were halfway through their washing, cutlery that had been laid out, musical instruments that had not been put away, books that had been flipped through, carriages that had stopped by the roadside without any horses. These things all reconstructed the appearance of the town before the bizarre situation happened. I keep feeling that something is missing. Weimar couldn't help but whisper when he saw the municipal square in sight. Oh, Bayonder warrior, gladiator, weapons master, sounds familiar, oh right. The sequence pathway that the Church of the God of Combat has in control is very similar to this. Sequence 9 warrior, sequence 8 pugilist, sequence 7 weapons master. Due to the limits of his security clearance, Klein only knew the titles of the first 3 sequences that the Church of the God of Combat had in control, but the similarity between the 2 pathways was still obvious. Based on the core meaning, they are basically identical. The complete sequence that the Church of the God of Combat mastered is the so-called giant sequence pathway. It is said that there was a god that emerged in the 3rd epoch, which was the Cataclysm epoch, to inherit the estate of the giant king. Or could it be that he himself was an ancient giant? Klein analyzed and judged while he maintained his calm appearance. Derek continued to explain. After we pulled through the initial hardships, the City of Silver has been ruled by a 6-member council ever since. The elder that enjoys the highest position in the council is called the chief. The other 5 are equal in rank. The current 6-member council is formed by 3 demon hunters, 2 guardians with the greatest potential, and a shepherd. The City of Silver has 3 high-sequence Bayonder, demigod-like experts. These 3 alone could destroy the Tarot Club 100 times over. Klein felt a little afraid. He had yet to attempt recruiting someone under the nose of a high-sequence Bayonder. However, since the young man was just a mere commoner, with him not even at sequence 9, it was unlikely that he would gain the attention of the upper echelons for a long time. Thus Klein relaxed again. His shepherd from another sequence pathway, perhaps from one of the incomplete pathways, sounds reminiscent of the style of the Aurora Order. The member from the Aurora Order that wrote a letter to Mr. Z, what was his name again? He kept mentioning the Lord's Lamb. Klein maintained his leisurely posture and asked casually, "Shepherd." Yes, this is a sequence pathway that we found from a city that the Corner 2, Parvy shot him a glance. People are missing. No, that's not it. I know that. Weimar shook his head seriously. His eyes lit up. I know what's missing. What? Captain Gray and First Mate Al Keaton asked in unison. Weimar laughed. Money, notes, and gold coins. He straightened his back and continued explaining. Although we haven't entered the houses to conduct a detailed search, according to my experience, even if we just look from the outside, we should be able to find some. However, there's nothing at all. Perhaps it's just that the people here aren't very rich and don't have the habit of leaving their money around. Parvy didn't agree. This was not an important problem. The 4 of them quickly diverted their attention. After entering the municipal square, they looked at the tallest building. It was a black-spired cathedral. Mushrooms tenaciously grew out of the cracks in the bricks of the cathedral. They were either simple and plain or gorgeous and colorful. They strung together, showing a presence that couldn't be ignored in front of the green vine. This place feels like it's been abandoned for even longer. Parvy paused before saying, from the architectural style, this looks like the Cathedral of the Goddess. The people here also believe in the goddess. She found this rather peculiar. The residents of such a hidden island and strange town seem to believe in the Evernight goddess. Al Keaton stared at it for a few seconds before saying, seems so. Then he immediately added, it feels like the closer we get to the square and the cathedral, the longer it appears to be abandoned. Be it the weeds on the road, the green plants on the surface of the buildings, or the mushrooms of all kinds, the closer they got to the center of the town, the more numerous they became. And the cathedral seemed to be covered in a green coat with many speckled holes. After a moment of silence, Parvy suggested, let's go to the cathedral. As long as the goddess is still watching this land, there won't be any particularly serious problems there. Captain Gray and Al Keaton didn't object, but the former reiterated the rules of this exploration. After entering the cathedral, you can only use your eyes to see and ears to hear. Don't do anything else. No problem. Weimar walked towards the cathedral at the side of the square. This left Parvy with no choice but to gesture a circle on her chest and simply ask for the goddess's protection. As there wasn't much time left, the four of them sped up and quickly arrived at the cathedral's entrance. They were in no hurry to push the door open and enter. They sized up their surroundings individually. Very quiet, Captain Gray concluded. The other three also expressed that they did not find any problem. The black cathedral's door was ajar. After Weimer exerted force with his hands, it slowly opened. The bottom of Captain Gray's black eye patch immediately lit up, helping him see the scene inside clearly. There were no tables or chairs in the hall. There were windows on both sides that shone with light, and it was dark red above. Drip, drip, drip. Drops of viscous, pale yellow liquid fell from the sky and hit the ground like rain, giving people the feeling that the dome was severely damaged and was facing a storm. Before Gray could speak, he saw the viscous, disgusting liquid dissolve into puddles. The puddles rolled and bubbled endlessly. The bubbles popped, and deformed babies with moist skin and pale yellow dirt crawled out. As these babies grew rapidly, they dripped more viscous yellow liquid, creating more puddles and stirring more bubbles. Wah! Wah-ya! Wah-ya! They began to cry. Just seeing this scene caused blood to flow from Gray's eye. The eye patch turned dark red, as if he was moved to tears by the birth of life. His mind was blank. He felt that every part of his body was nurturing a new life. The sharp pain snapped him to his senses, and he instinctively took a step back. The scene in front of Gray returned to normal. It was still the empty cathedral hall with wide windows that lacked maintenance, and a tall and magnificent dome. There was no viscous liquid that fell like rain, nor were there countless deformed babies and puddles everywhere. Huff-puff, Gray panted heavily. The next second he turned around and shouted as he ran, "Run!" Thud, thud, thud. Gray rushed out of the municipal square. He did not care about Parvy, Al-Keaton, and Weimer at all. He was already considered a responsible captain for still remembering to warn his teammates under the current circumstances. Thud, thud, thud. Gray didn't dare stop at all. Relying on his amazing physique despite his blurred vision, he ran all the way out of the strange town, back to the crude port, and onto his ship. Al-Keaton, Parvy, and Weimer rushed back in less than 10 seconds. Set sail, Gray ordered. Gray waited until the ship set sail before he bothered to check his injury. He raised a hand to his eye and instantly felt moisture. However, when he brought his hand to his eyes, he realized that it was not blood, just tears. As he ran, he kept crying. Gray's brows knitted together, startled and suspicious. Soon, he confirmed that he was not injured at all. "What did you guys see?" He turned to look at Al-Keaton and the others. Weimer looked at the captain. His eyes were red as if he had just cried. He said with lingering fear, "I saw fireball after fireball. They fell from the roof with a whoosh and then exploded. Light. My eyes were filled with light. I felt like I was going blind. No, I'm already blind. Then I felt like I was melting. It hurt. It really hurt." Weimer heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Captain woke me up at that moment. He rubbed his eyes and said in confusion and relief, "I'm fine now. It's just that I kept crying at first, but then I got better. It was like a bad dream." What he meant was that the dream was very real. There were still lingering fears when he woke up, but he would be fine after a while. Captain Gray nodded and carefully examined Weimer's eyes. After confirming that there was really no problem, he looked at First Mate Al-Keaton. "What about you?" Al-Keaton looked at the distant coastline and the shrinking port and said in a reminiscent tone, "The entire cathedral collapsed. I fell to the ground with the surrounding pillars and stone bricks. It was bottomless. Moreover, my head, my flesh, and my skin fell at different speeds. They began to pull at each other. It hurt, it really hurt." The slightly loose skin and deep wrinkles on Al-Keaton's face trembled as if he didn't want to recall any more of the incident. He exhaled and said after a while, "My entire body was about to be torn apart. Then it was as if there were invisible hands around me. They pressed my hands, legs, head, skin, flesh, and bones to my internal organs with great force. I wished I could die as quickly as possible. Fortunately, I woke up the next second thanks to you, Captain." Weimer sighed with emotion. "This is even more painful than what happened to me. If you hadn't woken up in time, you might have seen yourself turn into a blood-colored meatball." Parvy listened quietly and said thankfully, "I wasn't in that much pain. I saw darkness, darkness that made me feel at ease. Then I fell asleep. It was like I was back in my bed until I was woken up by you, Captain." Captain Gray nodded slowly. From the looks of it, what we encountered or experienced is different. Moreover, we are left without any injuries. It's just some stress. Keaton affirmed the captain's statement. He then voiced his guess. Perhaps we were under an illusion or hallucinated for some other reason. And because everyone has different personalities and experiences, what we saw and experienced were different. Before Keaton finished speaking, Parvy blurted out, "Mushroom." Could it be those mushrooms? Those mushrooms were the strangest. Yes, definitely. Weimer agreed after being momentarily taken aback. It was common knowledge that one could be poisoned and end up hallucinating after eating certain mushrooms. In such a strange place, it was reasonable for one to be affected just by approaching the mushroom. Captain Gray seriously recalled for a moment and said, "That's possible." There was a very faint, sweet smell in the air, the fragrance of some mushroom. In the middle of a small town called Utopia, on the surface of the cathedral that was suspected to belong to the Church of Evernight, mushrooms suddenly became active. They squirmed and crazily spewed out large amounts of spore. Before the spores landed, they had already grown into different mushrooms in the air. Then they continued to create more spores. And in the gap between the black bricks occupied by the mushrooms and green plants, pale white, tiny, baby-like deformed palms squeezed out. Silently, the entire cathedral collapsed, and a bottomless pit appeared in the ground. Huge pits spread out, pulling the buildings over and shattering them into pieces. Elsewhere in the town, the large number of houses that had originally stood tall had long disappeared, leaving behind large pieces of colorful glass-like traces. In the depths of the ground, muffled sounds came one after another. In just a few seconds, the place had completely fallen silent. Buildings rose from the ground one after another, and the town quickly recovered as if it had a vitality of its own. Furnishings in the houses were almost the same as before, but there were certain differences in their detail. What was left had switched to the right, and what was far became close. Late at night on the ship, Weimer, who could not sleep because of what happened during the day, came to the deck and breathed in the moist sea breeze. "You're still awake." He saw the bosun Parvy. Parvy was still wearing the clothes she wore during the day. She looked at the dark sea in the distance and said, "I was going to sleep, but I suddenly recalled some details after I closed my eye." "What details?" Weimer asked curiously. Parvy's face reflected the red moonlight as she said, "There's something else under the darkness I saw in the cathedral." Without waiting for Weimer to ask, she muttered to herself dreamily, "There were many skeletons, some children's and some babies. Some of them were normal, while others looked like monsters. It was packed with them everywhere. Also, there seemed to be a raven hidden in the depths of the darkness." Things of the dark destroyed. It only reached sequence 5 Shepherd, but Elder Norwia is very strong, very strange, and very scary. It is said that she once won against an evil spirit at the level of a high sequence Beyonder without getting injured. Therefore, when there was a vacancy in the 6-member council, they made an exception for her, Derek, feeling a little fear. Klein thought, then smiled as he asked, "What's the sequences before Shepherd?" "I find them familiar. As you know, a sequence is a historical name, and its current name is always different. In the City of Silver, the names of potions have never changed," Derek refuted instinctively. He then lowered his head and said, "Sequence 9 Secret Suppliant." "Indeed." Klein was satisfied when his guesses were confirmed. "This is the name of Sequence 9 from the Aurora Order. Sequence 8 is Whispered, Sequence 7 Shadow Ascetic, Sequence 6 Rose Priest, Sequence 5 Shepherd." Derek recounted what he knew. Whispered, "Listener, they are about the same, he. I know more than the information provided by the Tinjin Nighthawks." In a good mood, Klein beckoned for Derek to continue. Derek then roughly described the current situation of the City of Silver, and finally, he couldn't help but say, "I carry the curse of destiny. Whether a citizen of the City of Silver is a commoner or a Beyonder, we all turn into evil spirits after we die. The evil spirit of a Beyonder is just stranger, more terrifying, and far more difficult to deal with. In the past, there were many occasions when this curse nearly destroyed the City of Silver. The only way to prevent an evil spirit from rising is for a person to be killed by someone of their own bloodline. Such a cruel matter. I hope you can grow strong and find a method for the people in the City of Silver to shake off the curse." Klein, the fool who was merely an empty shell, could only provide some free chicken soup for the soul. "So I want to be the sun. When there was a sun shining over the land, we had never encountered any curse." Derek muttered softly with great difficulty and pain. Klein nodded slightly and asked, "You will have the chance to. Remember that I can pull you in here anytime in the next 2 days. Try to avoid being around other people." "All right," Derek replied solemnly. "Before that, I need you to confirm your code name." Klein smiled and pointed at the deck of tarot cards that appeared on the table. Confident that Derek had never come into contact with tarot cards, he gave a brief introduction. "Pick one of the cards as your code name. Anything besides the Fool, Justice, and the Hanged Man." Derek took 2 steps forward, flipped through the tarot cards, and said without hesitation, "Sun." "I pick the Sun." "Remember your choice. It will follow you for the rest of your life," Klein replied like a charlatan. At the same time, he extended his hand and severed the connection in a restrained manner. Then he watched as the crimson glow receded, and the young man opposite him turned incorporeal and dispersed bit by bit. After the crimson light in front of him dissipated, Derek Berg saw his room once again. He saw the pure crystal ball in his hand. Crack! The crystal ball shattered from the inside. Some of it turned into pieces of illusory beams of light that flew into the void around him, while the other crystalline fragments fell noisily to the ground. Derek looked on, dumbfounded. He could see the traces of blood on his face, reflected in the bronze mirror. He noticed a crimson light spiraling on the back of his right palm, forming a circle with lines extending out from the edge. The strange symbol bore into the back of his palm and vanished. Derek fell into a daze in the time it took several flashes of lightning to illuminate the sky before snapping to his senses. He looked at the fragments of the crystal ball on the ground, then looked at the back of his right hand as his gaze turned deeper. He walked out of his bedroom, returned to the living room, and opened the door to look up at the sky above the city of silver. An arc of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the city with a silver sheen. Right on the heels of that was rumbling thunder. The world belonged to the dark. Without any speck of light, the heavy darkness only left people in despair. Derek clenched his fists. There was no joy in his eyes, for they were still filled with the remnant grief and pain. But he was no longer lost. "Phew, looks like I've managed to trick another person into becoming a member." "No, I've managed to recruit another member." Klein shook his head and mocked the present strength of his tarot club. The leader, the Fool, was only a sequence 9, one who had just fully digested the seer potion. And there were at least 3 high-sequence Beyonders at sequence 4 in the hopeless city of silver that the Sun spoke of. After mentioning the acting method one more time, I can start telling the captain the specifics in hand in my special application. At the very least, I'll stop being in charge of support once I become a clown. Klein didn't stay in the world of fog. He extended his spirituality, wrapped it around himself, and initiated a descent. Tearing through the gray fog and passing through the ravings, he returned to his room before dispelling the wall of spirituality. Then Klein picked up the key and headed out of the room. He first went to the 2 rooms booked by Dunn to take a look in order to confirm that the captain and Fry hadn't returned yet. He then headed to the first level and handed the key back to the boss. The boss looked at the wall clock to the side and gave a thumbs up. "Well done." "Hey, are you mistaken over why I booked an hourly room?" Klein wanted to explain himself, but finally decided to leave the misunderstanding as it was. Feeling wronged, he tried to console himself. "Yes, this way. He won't mention that I rented another room in front of the captain." After heading out and going through the motions, Klein did a quick divination and returned to the inn based on the results. He headed straight to the second floor to find Dunn and Fry discussing their investigations in one of the rooms, just as he expected. "We can confirm that the Wraith appeared within the last 3 months," Dunn summarized to Klein with a nod as he came through the door. Klein immediately echoed, "My investigations also confirmed it." He highlighted the main points of his questioning and concluded, "Heh, there's a townsfolk named Scoundrel Gray who claimed that he had the portrait of the first Baron Lama. He said that it was an antique oil painting more than 1,000 years old." "Don't tell me you bought it." Dunn's eyes shimmered as he was taken aback before he asked, "Captain, do you think that I'm so stupid to be fooled that easily?" Klein gave a dry laugh. "No, I didn't. Even though I'm a history student, I have attended some lessons on archaeology and have some degree of experience in this area. I can more or less determine if something is fake. The person in the portrait looked a little like my history teacher, Mr. Isaac." He casually mentioned the most important piece of information. And indeed, Dunn didn't pay too much attention to it. He massaged his temples and said, "This is a small town near a historical site. There will always be a myriad of antiques here. I just saw a vendor selling the silver wine glasses of Baron Lamont. Someone tried to sell me the insignia of the Lamont family, claiming that it had been dug out of the castle," Fry added. Klein subconsciously asked, "Did you guys buy them?" Fry and Klein looked at each other and didn't continue with the subject. "The next mission is for you or Fry to take sealed artifact 30782 out of town to somewhere uninhabited. Otherwise, a good half of the people in this inn will become idiots blathering praises of the sun. Are you going first or Fry?" Dunn looked at Klein with his deep gray eyes. "Me?" Klein raised his hand slightly and smiled. "It's still quite early, so I can come back and have a nice sleep later. We're doing 2-hour shifts, right?" "Yes." "Fry, go over with Klein and confirm where you'll exchange the sealed artifact." Dunn turned to look at corpse collector Fry. He had already found an opportunity to hand sealed artifact 3078 over to Fry when they split up to conduct their investigation. Otherwise, he would have been purified and started praising the sun. Fry hadn't had enough time to recover and could only hold the item for another 3 hours. "All right." Fry took out the mutated sun's sacred emblem from the inner pocket of his black windbreaker and handed it over to Klein. Klein took the item with a fair bit of curiosity and interest. The metal was warm to the touch, as if hot water was flowing within it. The warm, gentle glow was like a ripple, spreading outward in waves and bringing with it a pure smell. At the same time, Klein felt that the dark gold and sacred emblem carved with the symbol of the sun was cleansing his spirituality, removing the impurities and leaving it pure. Of course, all sealed artifacts have their danger. Death might occur if one isn't careful enough. It's even possible to have a fate worse than death, he muttered to himself as he placed the sealed artifact 3-0782 into his inner pocket. After inspecting his revolver, charms, and cane, he walked out of the room and left the inn together with Fry. They headed straight for the outskirts of Lamont town. The two circled an area beside a sparse and deserted forest and confirmed that there was no one within dozens of meters of them. "Chase away anyone who approaches you," Fry coldly reminded. "TL come to take your place in 2 hours." "Sounds good," Klein replied with a smile. After seeing Fry enter the town, he found a tall boulder he had eyed previously. He picked up some leaves from the tree beside him and wiped the surface of the boulder. He then touched the top of the stone with his finger and inspected the stone under the light of the crimson moon. After confirming that it was clean, Klein put on his black windbreaker and sat down. "Why stand when you can sit?" Klein thought to himself. After a few minutes of silence, he looked at the dark, quiet, and rather scary forest. He couldn't help but stand up, taking out several metal bottles from his hidden pockets and scattering their contents, herb powder and essential oils, around the boulder. Klein recited an incantation in Hermit. With the help of the materials, he created a barrier of spirituality, sealing the area he was in. He did this simple ritual for 2 reasons. First, he didn't want to rely too much on his premonition for danger, as a seer, to defend against corpses and spirits launching a sneak attack against him. The second reason was to keep the bugs away. This is 100 times better than insect repellent. Klein sat back down, satisfied. After sitting there for a few minutes, Klein took out sealed artifact 3-0782 out of curiosity. He began a detailed inspection of the mutated sun's sacred emblem. "I wonder if I could use divination to find out its origins and how it became special." He took out the pen and paper he always had on him and wrote a statement. "The origin of the mutated sun's sacred emblem in my hands." As a qualified and true seer, Klein had made the preparations needed to divine anyway. After reciting the statement 7 times, he closed his eyes and entered a state of cogitation, using that as a launchpad to propel him into his dream. All he saw were fragmented pieces of light in his dream. Other than that, he didn't learn anything else. Yes, the church must have gotten other seers to attempt the same thing in the past. The fact that there is no mention of its origins must mean that there was no result from the divination, just like what happened just now, Klein sighed. He then thought, "I wonder what would happen if I eliminate the interferences." This thought immediately filled Klein's head, pushing his curiosity to a peak. After more than 10 minutes of hesitation, he stood up. He decided that it was fine since there was no one around, considering how he was in a secluded area of the forest. He took 4 steps counterclockwise inside his wall of spirituality, before entering the world above the fog once again. Klein sat at the seat of honor of the ancient table in the magnificent palace. He conjured a few sheets of yellowish-brown goatskin and a black fountain pen, as well as the mutated sun's sacred emblem. It feels rather real. He rubbed sealed artifact 30782 in his hands, finding the tactile feedback identical to the one he had felt in the outside world. It instantiates itself based on what I felt. Klein mumbled to himself before writing down the statement he had come up with previously, the origin of the mutated sun's sacred emblem in my hand. After reciting the statement 7 times, he held the piece of goatskin and sealed artifact 30782 in his hand. He leaned back and entered his dream. In the blurry dream world, Klein saw a drop of glowing gold liquid. It was warm and bright. It was suspended above an altar, before a man dressed in a white classic robe. The man only had his back facing Klein. He had lost all signs of life as he fell slowly towards the sacrificial altar. At that moment, the sun's sacred emblem he was holding had come into contact with the golden liquid, the latter quickly seeping into the emblem. The dream quickly dissipated after Klein saw this, waking him up. So it was because of the golden liquid that this sacred emblem has been so effective and uncontrollable to this day. Decades have passed since the discovery of this emblem, but its cleansing powers haven't declined. I wonder what that golden liquid was. Some advanced Beyonder ingredient. Klein toyed with the sealed artifact 3-0782 in his hand and slipped into deep thought. After deliberating over it for a few minutes, he tried to emulate the feeling he had in the dream. He wanted to separate the golden liquid from the mutated sun's sacred emblem he had conjured. He accomplished it almost immediately as the thought came to him. Klein looked in shock at the emblem, which was no longer warm or pure. He watched as the drops of golden liquid silently suspended themselves in the air. He had even more praises for this mysterious space above the fog. This is practically a miracle, even if the separation and instantiation here isn't real. The origins of this drop of golden liquid. He penned down a new statement with great excitement. Death, the origins of this drop of golden liquid. After reciting the divination statement 7 times, Klein held onto the goatskin and the illusory golden liquid before leaning back in his seat. He didn't know if he could divine with the item that was instantiated based purely on a feeling. All he could do was make bold assumptions and carefully seek confirmation. In seconds, Klein's eyes darkened, turning from brown to black as he entered a state of cogitation. His eyelids drooped down and he saw the illusory yet blurry dream. In the blurry world that looked in shambles, a golden, glaring sun suddenly appeared. A low grunt resounded across the void. The pure and clean light suddenly lit everything up as the gold and burning flames swept outwards. Boom! Klein was instantly expelled from his dream world and flipped onto his side as he shivered. His body seemed to become a huge bonfire which burned with a raging flame. At that moment, his thoughts were all over the place. No proper idea could form from the chaos in his mind. Rumble! The mysterious space above the gray fog shook violently, and the lofty palace collapsed inch by inch. The ancient, mottled bronze table broke into a few pieces. The terrifying changes only continued for 3 seconds before the world above the gray fog returned to tranquility as though nothing had happened. The gold flame on Klein gradually extinguished. He rolled around on his charred skin as he groaned in pain, until he eventually regained his ability to think. He supported himself on the armrest of the high chair and stood up with great difficulty. He was terrified and confused about what had just happened. He had never imagined that a mere divination would result in such consequences. He panted and lifted his head to survey his surroundings. He realized that the lofty palace and ancient bronze table, which looked like they had stood unchanged since ancient times, had been damaged. In the world above the gray fog, which had never experienced any abnormality, it was simply an unprecedented level of damage. What happened? Did my divination point towards some unfathomable existence? Klein calmed down slightly and let his burned flesh shed while he speculated. If I wasn't protected by this mysterious space above the gray fog, there might not even be ashes of me left behind. Could that drop of gold liquid be the blood of a god? Did I see the eternal blazing sun, or some powerful angel of his? No, that was the sun, so I think it was the former. Damn, did I just look directly at a god? Klein felt more fear as he thought about it. He felt that he had nearly died. Those who know nothing fear nothing, but those who don't court death won't die. In the future, I can't just divine anything and everything. Who knows what I'll see? If that were to happen once more, I don't know if this mysterious space could even shelter me from fatal damage. When that happens, I'd actually die. Yes, it definitely won't do if I continue making experiments with the golden liquid, the existence from before which was likely eternal blazing sun. He must have sensed the sudden, hidden and unexpected influence from the divination above the gray fog, and failed to respond in time. If he were prepared, this mysterious space might not have been able to withstand the repercussions. Having come to this realization, Klein's body had already returned to normal. It was no longer charred, but compared to before, he was dimmer and more incorporeal than before. He lifted his hand to massage his temples, and commanded with his mind to restore the palace and the long table. Then the palace that looked like the home of a giant, and the long table cast out of bronze, returned to normal. Everything looked like it had before. Klein sat down and leaned against the back of the chair. He mocked himself and said, "Well, this isn't entirely bad. At least I know the limit of the mysterious space, and I have a certain goal. Only powers approaching the angels of the gods can completely influence the power of the area above the gray fog. So I have to add another new rule to my seer principle. Do not randomly divine things that involve a high-level entity. Yes, I shouldn't hastily activate my spirit vision either. If I were to look directly at things that shouldn't be looked at directly, it might be game over. In the outside world, I don't have the mysterious space to fend off most of the negative effects." After a while, Klein's expression turned odd because some knowledge was reverberating in his head. Yes, knowledge. In the short time he had spent with what appeared to be eternal blazing sun, Klein was constantly in his divination state. Hence, he could instinctively divine certain matters and knowledge from the being that he was looking at. He quickly used a dream divination to recall and organize what he had gathered. That wasn't his primary objective. He picked up the black fountain pen and wrote one line after another. 1. Do not look directly at God. 2. Pure white angel. 3. The technique of making a flaring sun charm. It's a relatively high-level charm in the domain of the sun. Its potency can last a year before it deteriorates. There's no need for a ritual to pray to the eternal blazing sun, but the procedure requires the sealed artifact 3-0782 to take the ritual's place. It will siphon power from the mutated sun's sacred emblem. 4. Extremely hostile towards Lord of Storms and God of Knowledge and Wisdom. 5. Bard Potion Formula. Main ingredients: a crystal sunflower or an adult flint bird's tail feather or a fire bird's tail feather, a piece of siren rock or a singing sunflower. Supplementary ingredients: a blade of midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine juice, a blade of elf dark leaf. 6. Light Supplement Potion Formula. Main ingredients: a piece of brilliance rock or powder of dazzling soul or blood of a mirror hedgehog or the heart of a magma titan. Supplementary ingredients: a golden edge sunflower, 3 drops of aconite juice. 7. Priest of Light Potion Formula. Information of main ingredients missing. Supplementary ingredients: 5 grams of rosemary, 7 drops of fingered citron juices, rock water. 8. Sequence 4. Unshadowed Potion Formula. Main ingredients could be the golden blood of God, extracted from the mutated sun's sacred emblem. Could also be replaced with 3 adult sun divine bird's tail feathers and a piece of holy brilliance rock. Information of supplementary ingredients missing. After writing down the 8 lines, Klein couldn't help but rap the edge of the long bronze table. He had gained way more than he imagined. He was already satisfied with surviving his reckless divination earlier, but now he had received an unexpected survival reward. From the confidential information he received from the Nighthawks, he knew that the sequence pathway that the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun held was called Sun, and its sequence 9 was Bar. It would allow the Beyonder to imbue courage and strength for themselves and their allies through their singing, a job that brought about devotion and submission. Their slogan was, "Let us praise the sun." The corresponding sequence 8 was Light Suppliant. They could cast spells and hold rituals from the sun's domain, which were very effective against corpses and spirits. Sequence 7 was called Solar High Priest, which greatly enhanced the spells and rituals within its domain. In other words, I have obtained the complete potion formulas of Sequence 9 and Sequence 8 in the Sun sequence pathway. Yes, unlike before, The potion formula even lists replacement items and ingredient names from different eras, as expected of formulas obtained directly from eternal blazing sun through divination. Klein thought in satisfaction. He had originally planned on seeing if the hanged man could solve the request of the young man from the City of Silver. After all, the Church of the Lord of Storms and the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun were the most ancient Orthodox sect. They had fought against each other for thousands of years, so it would only make sense for the two churches to have learned the initial sequence of each other's pathway. The hanged man might not have cared about the sun pathway previously, but since he is very likely a sequence 7 seafarer, it would probably be easy for him if he really needed to gather the information. However, I don't need him now. I solved it myself, through an unbelievable yet extremely dangerous method, Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged man, my son friend. Your fool nearly turned himself into a charred corpse, Klein lampooned silently while still feeling a lingering sense of fear. He lowered his head and looked at the records on the goatskin before him. He thought of another formula. Would the Priest of Light be an ancient name of Solar High Priest? The confidential information of the Nighthawks never mentioned it, and my divination didn't pinpoint the sequence number. Is it sequence 6 or sequence 5? Sequence 4, unshadowed. This is the first high sequence formula that I've obtained. It's such a pity that it lacks the supplementary ingredient. I wonder how I can fill in the blanks. I can't believe that drop of golden liquid is really the blood of a god. Sealed artifact 30782 is probably far stronger than anyone imagining. From what I can see, it's sufficient to become a grade 1 sealed artifact. Yes, it's likely that the Nighthawks from before only determined whether the item has any traits of the living, how much danger it would cause to nearby humans, how difficult it is to control the item's effects, and if it can be used against corpses and spirits. They had no way of discovering its unique origin. The mutated sun's sacred emblem can probably even fight against evil spirits. How could the examiner find an evil spirit to experiment on? As an official Nighthawk, I can't become the owner of sealed artifact 3-0782, but yes, I can find an opportunity to make a flaring sun charm and siphon its power. Sigh. I certainly can't do it now. I haven't prepared the necessary ingredients. Why would I, a Nighthawk of the Evernight goddess, carry the ingredients of the sun around with me? Klein massaged his forehead regrettably. He saw that there was no other movement in the world above the gray fog and finally relaxed. He confirmed that the eternal blazing sun hadn't managed to track him down. Do not look directly at God. Do not look directly at a high-level entity. I must remember this. Why would the eternal blazing sun be extremely hostile towards the Lord of Storms and the God of knowledge and wisdom? What the hell is a pure white angel? As these mixed thoughts filled his brain, Klein felt the emptiness and an aching pain in his head. Plus, he felt that too much time had passed. He had to return to the outer world, just in case someone discovered anything amiss. Back then, he thought it would take a minute or so to divine 2 or 3 times in the mysterious space. Plus, there was a spirituality wall isolating him from everything else. Once it was touched, his body in the world above the gray fog would sense it. Hence, he felt utterly safe, but he hadn't considered the possibility of having some sort of accident. In the end, he nearly lost his life, and that wasted quite a bit of time. Due to the fact that he was afraid that he would be greeted by a light of purification beam, or discover that the mutated sun's sacred emblem was damaged, he enveloped his body with spirituality before he stimulated a descent with his heart in his mouth. The crimson moonlight reflected in his eyes, and there was a darkness hidden within. Klein saw the sparse forest and the weeds before him, as well as the intact sealed artifact 30782 in his hand. After a few seconds of breathless anxiety, he finally believed that he was safe. Klein let out a breath of relief. He felt exhausted after his insane probing at the border of death. The exhausted Klein dispelled the sealed wall of spirituality, allowing the cool wind to blow onto his face. The scent of grass and trees that the wind carried revitalized him. He rubbed the warm and classic sealed artifact 30782 with his hands and sighed to himself. Who would have thought that there would be a drop of God's blood in this emblem? I have to assume that the experts from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun must have tried searching for this item in the past, but couldn't find it. Klein stretched his neck. He didn't dare try anything else, keeping the mutated sun's sacred emblem in the inner pocket of his windbreak. His hand followed a chain and took out a silver vine-leaf pocket watch. He opened it to see that there was still about an hour before Corpse Collector Fry's shift. I need 2 matches to prop up my eyelids. This is a side effect of that near-death experience. Klein didn't have any other ideas. All he could do was take out a small metal bottle from a tiny hidden pocket. He uncapped the bottle and brought it near his nose. A pungent smell, a mix of mint and disinfectant, quickly entered his nose, giving Klein goosebumps. His senses were jolted, making him forget his fatigue temporarily. He had learned the formula from Corpse Collector Fry. It was called Kellogg's oil, and it could help a person ignore the stench of rotting corpses, as well as refresh and clear the mind. The next hour felt like torture. Klein paced around from time to time, and was bitten by the mosquitoes in the forest several times. Finally, he saw the black-haired, blue-eyed Fry walking out of the town wearing a windbreaker and holding a cane. Even though Fry still looked like a living corpse, Klein felt as though he was looking at his savior. He covered his mouth and let out a yawn, making his eyes teary. He made his way over and took out sealed artifact 30782 from his pocket. "What happened?" Fry asked as he looked at his partner's pale face. Klein sighed and said, "I just did my shift at Channy's Gate the previous night and didn't sleep too well in the morning, so I'm very tired." He didn't elaborate further and changed the subject. "Shall I come for my next shift 4 hours from now?" 7 hours. The captain doesn't need sleep at night. Fry took the mutated sun's sacred emblem. "I'm glad someone enjoys staying up late." Klein ridiculed the captain under his breath. He bade goodbye to Fry and walked towards the town. On the way back to the inn, he took out his pocket watch again and checked the time. 10 minutes earlier than we arranged. What a nice person." Klein laughed and walked faster. He returned to the inn and opened the half-closed door. The boss watched him as he made his way to the second floor before he entered his room. He removed his coat and shoes after locking the door. He didn't wash up, but instead fell directly onto the bed. His breathing became heavy in just a few seconds, then long and peaceful. In his dreams, Klein returned to Earth where he was playing a game he hadn't beat. A cup of soda and a plate of spicy chicken wings were on his left. His right was a bowl of rice and bitter bamboo shoots meat soup. He didn't like bitter bamboo shoots, but he liked it in soup with meat slices. The refreshing taste and the little bit of fat from the meat were tantalizing, a perfect complement to the rice. He could eat an extra bowl of rice if it was paired with some good sauce dip. Just as Klein was about to enjoy his supper and continue playing his game, his dream changed again, presenting him with the internal layout of 2 Daffodil Street. Klein suddenly became alert, aware that he was dreaming. He saw himself seated at the side of the dining table, a copy of the Tianjin Daily Tribune in his hand. In front of him was a bowl of tomato oxtail stew, pan-fried lamb chops, mashed potatoes, and wheat bread. He subconsciously turned to look at the door, suddenly noticing a figure standing outside the window of the living room, silently staring inside the house. Klein was shocked. He immediately recognized the gray-eyed Dun. Half his face was clinging close to the window as he silently watched the people inside. "Captain, can you not scare someone in their dreams? Is this your way of acting as a nightmare?" Klein thought, finding humor in his exasperation. He scooped up a mouthful of stew and put it into his mouth. "Ah, this is my cooking." He sighed to himself. He understood why he suddenly became alert in his dream, why the scene of him on Earth vanished. He would naturally become aware when someone barged into his dreams. At this moment, Dunn left his spot by the oriel window and directly entered the house. In his black windbreaker, he came silently before Klein. He took off his hat and nodded before sitting down. He didn't stand on ceremony, picking up cutlery and quickly polishing off the stew, lamb chops, wheat bread on the table. Klein looked on dumbfounded, unsure what the captain was doing. "Phew." Dunn exhaled in satisfaction and gave Klein a thumbs up. He then took out his pipe and a matchstick before taking an intoxicated puff. He exhaled a cloud of smoke and stood up. He then put on his hat and bowed before leaving the house and the dream. 74. Klein looked at the captain's back, unable to collect himself for a long time. He looked down at the empty plates and instinctively wanted to conjure up the food he had just now. But this time the oxtail stew, lamb chops, mashed potatoes didn't appear in his dream. It was completely eaten. A nightmare can do that. Klein twitched his lips in thought and frustration. So the captain's goal was to prevent me from eating supper in my dream. That sure is a nightmare. This method of acting as a nightmare sure is creative. He let out a laugh and exited his dream, once again falling asleep. At about 5:30 the morning the next day, Klein, who had no choice but to wake up early, drink his coffee and eat his toast and bacon. He hurried out of town to take over from Dunn. At 7 in the morning, they prepared to set off back to Tingen. It wasn't even 10 when they arrived at 36 Zoudeland Street. Fire sat behind the typewriter after Dunn. The most energized of the lot returned sealed artifact 30782 to the back of Channy's gate. He took advantage of the fact that the clerks hadn't arrived yet so that he could write a report on the mission and the claims of the related expenditures. Klein looked on from the side, satisfied that the items he had expended were within the list, including the materials he used to drive the bugs and mosquitoes away. He didn't return home immediately, for he had arranged to meet the asylum's Dr. Daxter at 1 in the afternoon at the agreed-upon venue through a coded letter. And there's still the tarot gathering at 3. Why does the boss of a secret society have such a tiring life? Klein thought to himself. He took a 2-hour nap in the Nighthawk's break room to catch up on sleep. He didn't forget the information he had obtained the previous day. He wasn't worried that he would forget, for the information could be recalled using divination. He was afraid that he would disregard the existence of this information and even lose the ability to divine the information. Thus, he recalled the pieces of information once again before he slept to reinforce them. This was also the reason Klein insisted on doing a review every week and reorganize all the information he knew. After lunch, he took a look at his pocket watch and left the Blackthorn Security Company for the shooting club at 3 Zoudeland Street. Klein entered the reception area after pushing open the door, but he didn't head directly to the shooting range belonging to the Nighthawks. Instead, he found a seat in the hall as he waited patiently with his black cane in hand. He had arranged to meet Daxter at the Zoudeland Street Shooting Club. He had arranged this through handwritten letters. Whenever Klein needed to meet him, he would write to Dr. Daxter Guderian in place of a patient's family member and ask about a unique condition called dissociative identity disorder. In his letter, Klein would use various methods to mention the term spectator, as well as a hidden mark of ink to authenticate his identity. The letter would also casually mention a time to meet. As for the place to meet, they had already decided this the first time they met. If Klein felt that there was a need to change the location, he would mention it when they met in person. When Daxter Guderian needed to meet for non-urgent matters, he could send a letter to the Hound Pub or the Shooting Club. The recipient would be marked as Mr. Hornesis, which Klein would take at scheduled time. In urgent situations, he could hand the letter directly to the boss of the Hound Pub, Wright, and mention his search for mercenaries. This way, Wright, who was an associate of the Nighthawks, would immediately hand the letter over to the Blackthorn Security Company. After waiting for a while, Klein saw the refined Daxter enter the shooting club a few minutes past 1. He was wearing a black hat and a fitted tuxedo. He had a cane inlaid with silver in his hands, as well as a pair of gold-framed spectacles on his face. Daxter walked around the club without attracting attention and saw Klein, who nodded slightly. He then retracted his gaze and walked to the counter, expertly applying for a shooting range and renting a gun. This was not his first visit. Small shooting range 7, 3 solely an hour. The fee for renting a revolver is 1 solely 7 pence per hour, and it contains 6 rounds. The receptionist quickly settled the request. After Daxter confirmed that he was renting the items for an hour and paid the fee of 10 solely, he took the revolver and extra bullets and was led into the respective shooting range by the facilitator. Klein waited another 5 minutes before slowly standing up. He grabbed his cane before walking to the small shooting range 7 and knocked on the door. The door opened a tiny crack with a creak. Daxter first looked around cautiously, then opened the door fully. Klein immediately entered and locked the door. "Good afternoon, Mr. Daxter," he said as he took out a 10 solely bill. He handed the bill over to Daxter. "We wouldn't let our associates bear any extra fee. Because I can claim compensation," he added in his heart. Daxter didn't decline. He took the cash and asked heavily, "Mr. Morty, why did you ask to meet me?" Klein obviously couldn't just bring up the telepathist formula right at the start. However, he didn't hide his intention either. After all, the man opposite him was a spectator. He wouldn't be conned so easily. Has Hood Eugen behaved unusually recently? He first asked Daxter Guderian about the patient in the asylum, who was a member of the psychology alchemist. Daxter examined Klein's eyes, expression and gesture. He thought and said, "No, he's acting normal. Frankly speaking, I think if he really wanted to leave the asylum, he could immediately behave in a very healthy and very normal manner. But he hasn't done so, and he continues to stay in the asylum. He appears to be treating every patient. Yes, patients who exhibit chaotic, violent, or abnormal thoughts appear to be getting better. Maybe Hood Eugen is trying to train his Beyonder powers with this method." Psychiatrist, sequence 7 that corresponds to spectator. Perhaps even higher, since Hood Eugen isn't a doctor in the asylum but entered as a patient, it means that he hasn't truly grasped the acting method. It should be as Daxter has guessed. He's probably training his Beyonder skills, and doing so resembles that of the acting method. To a certain extent, it could slow down the potion's negative influence. Hence, Hood Eugen decided to just take the asylum as his home. Klein openly showed that he was in deep thought regarding Hood Eugen's matter, because that would make Daxter Guderian feel that he knew and understood a lot, making him appear unfathomable. With this in mind, Klein guessed something else. The psychology alchemists hadn't grasped the acting method. After all, even a mainstay member at the Sequence 7 was unaware of this. In this era with few Beyonders, a Sequence 7 was considered mid-level in any secret organization. They were important enough to know crucial matters, especially those that could help members resist the loss of control. Plus, the Psychology Alchemist was a secret organization that had only been established in the last 300 years or even earlier. It was understandable that they hadn't grasped or deduced the acting method. The only organization that brought up the method explicitly was the Secret Order. They were an ancient organization that had more than 1,500 years of history and could be traced back to the previous epoch. Hey, the Church of the Goddess is even older than the Secret Order. Just the Letter of Saints from the Revelation of Evernight clearly indicates that it's nearly 3,000 years old. That's not to mention the mythical legends before that. How could such an ancient church not discover the acting method? During the long history of a huge organization, there must have been members who experimented with various possibilities, just like spirit medium Dolly. They might not have understood the principle of the acting method in detail, but they acted out the name of the potion correctly anyway. They would have discovered the gist of it through the good feedback they received. As that accumulates through the generations of Nighthawks, unless the higher-ups were a bunch of curly-haired baboons, it would be impossible to deduce the acting method. Klein's thoughts made the connection and was suddenly shocked. The Nighthawks who didn't know of the acting method, someone like spirit medium Dolly was a genius, an example that an ordinary member couldn't emulate. Hence, no one suspected that the experience of Dolly and others could be adapted for their own use. But to those who have grasped the acting method, this would be extremely odd. Klein believed that in the long history of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, spirit medium Dolly was definitely not the first member to have used the acting method to digest the low sequence potions quickly. She might not even be in the top 10 or top 50. It doesn't make sense. Unless Dolly didn't understand the acting method on her own, but had other people's guidance, then it could be concluded that every member of the Holy Cathedral follows the beliefs of the past, believing in their predecessors' experience and not daring to rebel against their teaching. After all, rebelling would imply the loss of control most of the time. Yes, other than this explanation, there is another possibility. The higher-ups of the church have hidden the acting method, for some reason. I need to flip through some records and search for examples of Beyonders in the Church of the Evernight Goddess digesting their potions quickly, as well as their final outcome, Klein thought with a mask of solemnity. Daxter looked at him, waited for a few minutes and asked curiously, "Officer, is there some sort of problem with Hood Eugen's actions?" "Not right now. It just made me think of other matters," Klein replied, smiling. He cast his suspicions aside. He asked instead, "Has there been any actions taken by the psychology alchemists recently?" "No, besides a small gathering in Awa to exchange items and experience," Daxter answered honestly. Klein nodded slightly and said, "How about your own situation?" Daxter controlled his expression as he replied, "Not too good myself. I still hear some ravings and have some illusion. If I wasn't a doctor specializing in mental health, I might even think that I have some sort of disorder." As he spoke, his face grew solemn. "I followed Hood Eugen's and your instructions to ignore those illusions and raving. That made me feel much better, but they still affect my sleep, and I have become more grumpy and short-tempered. I'm not like myself, as though another new me is growing from within, or maybe it could be described as a new character. I'm very worried and terrified that I might suddenly lose control one day. Just as I have predicted, I didn't even need to divine to see that coming. Having prepared for this, Klein smiled and said, "You don't have to worry, you're a subsidiary member of the Nighthawks now. There are benefits for you. As an ancient organization, we master many methods to keep one from losing control. It isn't 100% effective, but it will definitely help you. Besides, I'm willing to share with you my personal experience. You must know the man standing before you only used a month to shake off the shackles of illusions and ravings, and they haven't resurfaced. You should know from Hood Eugen and your other cadres that doing so is very difficult." For Sequence 8 telepathist, Klein bragged a little. "Officer, there's a bit of a lie in what you said, but it's mostly the truth," Daxter suddenly said calmly. "What do you want from me?" "It's tough to lie to a spectator," Klein replied with a smile. "It's not something that only I want to get. Miss Justice wanted too." Of course, he knew that Daxter would definitely assume that the Nighthawk squad wanted something. "TF, your method is really effective, and the items or information you want is within my reach." Daxter weighed his words as he spoke. "T will give you the perks in advance," Klein said straightforwardly. "We want the telepathist formula." He wouldn't hide the potion formula, but inform the captain as well. He would tell the captain that Daxter used it in exchange for his personal experience on bringing the potion under control. During the procedure, Klein would definitely verify the formula and accidentally memorize it in his head. Besides, he would use the fact that he used his personal experience in exchange for the formula to earn merit with the Nighthawks. By then, with his previous merits, he might not even need to put in extra effort to apply for the clown formula and main ingredients. A formula for 2 deals, quite a good bargain, Klein thought happily. Daxter looked into his eyes and kept quiet for a while before he said, "You're very frank, P'll try my best to get the formula, but I'm not sure how long it'll take. If it gets too dangerous, I hope that I can replace it with something else." "No problem." Klein didn't intend to force the request on the man. He then described the acting method vaguely. "The key to resisting the loss of control lies within the name of the potion. We have to understand it and learn its true meaning. You can't completely understand it by thinking about it. It must be understood through experience. For instance, as a spectator, you have to understand that you're only a spectator, not an actor. How a spectator should act is something that you need to discover through attempts and experimentation to deduce the principles required of you. From there, adhere to it strictly." Daxter listened attentively. Then he replied, "That's a brand new way to look at things. I'm willing to use the word theory to describe what you just said. This is just like a theory of a play in opera, P'll try, and I hope it'll help. If it really works, I'll do my best to get you the telepathist formula. May the goddess protect you." Klein drew a crimson moon on his chest. Klein didn't request the potion formula of psychiatrist as well, because he knew that it was a task that Daxter couldn't complete with his current position. He might end up exposing him if he wasn't careful. Thus, he planned to take it one step at a time, by helping Daxter achieve a higher position in the psychology alchemist slowly. Then, the long-term benefits would be abundant. Klein looked outside through the peephole in the door. Then he left quickly and turned to the small shooting range that was designated for the Nighthawks. He entered and locked the door. His face grew grave once again. When he was guessing the reason why the Church of the Goddess hadn't developed the acting method, he realized another thing that he had overlooked. He had overlooked it because he had obtained 2 crucial factors in reverse order. It made him fail to make a further consideration. First matter was that the Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. The second matter was that the Antigonus family had the seer sequence in its grasp, or at least most of it. As there was a very long period of time between when Klein learned the 2 facts, he almost didn't piece them together. Hence, he overlooked something that should have been pretty obvious. Since the Antigonus family had grasped a majority of the sequences of the seer pathway, how is it possible that the Church of the Evernight Goddess only received sequence 9 seer? They should have obtained more than that as the spoils of war. If a member from the Aurora Order got a hold of the clown formula from the Antigonus family's magical notebook, then what about the church that destroyed the entire Antigonus family? Even if the Antigonus family was well prepared and hid their most valuable things at the highest peak of Hornisus Mountain, the Church of the Evernight Goddess shouldn't have gained so little. They were the ones who killed the family members of Antigonus family. Furthermore, the dead can be made to speak. Time translator Klein paced around the small shooting range as he pondered over the intent of the Church of the Evernight Goddess regarding the seer pathway. Do they not want Nighthawks to choose this pathway, or do they not want Bayonders to become powerful through this pathway? As such, they only revealed the sequence 9 seer, which is clearly a support type. Captain also mentioned that the Holy Cathedral might have the subsequent recipes. No, they didn't even provide the names of the potions for sequence numbers 8 and 7 in the confidential information that I read. They merely described the battle characteristics of each sequence. In other words, they don't want those under them to realize that the Church might hold the actual formula. Is there a possibility that Nighthawks who chose this pathway could become vengeful spirits for the Antigonus family, and thus the higher-ups of the Church made a decision like this? Or could there be some other reason? Klein suddenly felt incredibly suspicious, a sense of intense wariness and vigilance towards the higher-ups of the Church. He began reconsidering whether he should openly hand over the special application to become a clown. If there are some terrifying secrets behind this, wouldn't I be jumping into the fire myself? Frankly, I'm not a person that can be placed under strict investigation, but the Tinjin branch has handed the clown potion formula over to the Church. Any seer who learned of this would hope to advance. Isn't that normal? Sequence 8 is still considered a low sequence, so it shouldn't invite too much attention. The only problem is that I would only take a month to completely digest the potion and submit a special application. If the higher-ups are familiar with the acting method, they would be able to realize what I did immediately. Of course, I do have an excuse. I know spirit medium Dolly after all. Old Neil, who is strict in abiding by the mystery prior's maxim, is also my friend. The claim that I gained inspiration from them and refined the acting method isn't too hard to believe. Yes, even Dolly received attention from the higher-ups only after showing signs of digesting a sequence 7 potion in 3 years, and is now being nurtured to become a future archbishop. Being at the stage of clown shouldn't garner me too much attention, unless I fully digest the clown potion in a few months, giving them confirmation to believe that I have truly mastered the acting method. In other words, applying for the clown potion isn't a risky move. I can continue with that plan, but I should pay attention to this in the future. So I'll have to take things one step at a time. I'll do a divination back at home. Klein collected himself and took out his revolver from his holster before carrying on with his daily shooting practice and maintenance. The quality of the revolver that he had gotten from his schoolmate Welch was unexpectedly good. Without any surprise, it would last for quite some time. Of course, he had to credit Dunn and Leonard for teaching him how to maintain a revolver. To be honest, it doesn't matter if it's damaged. These are all things I can request compensation for. Klein looked at the target, put away his revolver, and left the shooting club. He took the public transport back to 2 Daffodil Street. Before arriving at his destination, he saw a young lady pacing about his door. This lady was dressed in a blue lacy dress, as well as a thinly veiled hat. She was Melissa's classmate, Elizabeth, who had her adorable baby fat. She quickly approached when she saw Klein arrive, taking off her hat to reveal her joyful face. She paused for 2 seconds before smiling. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morty. I'm guessing that you just came back from Lama Town, right?" "I'm sorry I came back in the morning," Klein smiled. "No, I came from Zoudeland Street." Yes, that was a very honest answer. He laughed to himself. Elizabeth froze for a moment, then said with excitement, "All right, I guessed wrongly. I came to look for you, because I wanted to tell you that I didn't have that nightmare last night. I no longer dreamed about the knight in black armor. This was exactly the same as the result of your divination. Of course, that wraith was completely purified by sealed artifact 3-0782. I couldn't channel his spirit even if I was there, much less your dream." Klein laughed and replied gently, "I'm happy that you're freed from your troubles. I'm also very satisfied with my divination yesterday." Thank you once again. All right, I have to go now. I still have lessons in the afternoon. Bye-bye, Mr. Morty. You'll visit Melissa when I have the time, Tilda." Elizabeth left joyfully, renting a carriage by the side of the road. As the carriage began to roll forward, she smiled and thought proudly, "Melissa definitely doesn't know how great her brother is. It seems as though my explanation just now was useless." Young ladies would rather trust their intuition and the truths made up in their minds. Klein saw Elizabeth board the carriage and opened the door to his house. He made his way to his room. He rested for a while before he began to consolidate everything that had happened over the past week, including the questions he had yet to resolve. After completing the task, he burned his notes, took out his pocket watch and opened it. 2:30. There's another 15 minutes left. Seeing that he still had time, Klein put on his oldest suit and headed to Smyron Bakery at Iron Cross Street to buy a cup of sweet iced tea from Mrs. Wendy. He drank his beverage as he returned, then sealed his room with a wall of spirituality at 15 minutes to 3. He then took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the world above the gray fog. In the quiet, ancient palace, Klein conjured a piece of goatskin and wrote down a divination statement. I should obtain the clown potion through the Nighthawks. He put his pen down and untangled the spirit pendulum on his wrist. He grabbed the pendulum firmly with his left hand, allowing the topaz to be suspended right above the piece of paper. He recited the statement 7 times. His eyes darkened, and the pendulum in his hand started to turn. It turned clockwise. It's a positive answer, so it's appropriate. But it'll be hard to say for the sequences after clown. I should seriously develop my tarot club. Klein did another divination to confirm the answer. After this, he used his hand and pressed down on the dark red star representing the sun. He wanted to bring the youth from the city of Silver in early and ask if he revealed whatever had happened in this world to the 6-member council. If he hadn't, then Klein would give him a better way of knowing what time the gatherings would start. In a room of the Berg household in the city of Silver, Derek sat silently by the side of his bed, waiting for the fool's summoning. In order to avoid being near anybody, he didn't even go out of the house after he returned. He had nearly finished all the food in his room. Bearing with the hunger and hearing the growls of his stomach, Derek felt as though he was a living corpse roaming around on a dark plain. However, he remained silent, nor did he stand. At that moment, he saw a dark red color spread in the air, quickly swallowing him. The gray, boundless, cold, lonely world appeared in his field of vision once again. Seated at the seat of honor, the fool, who was obscured by the thick fog, presented himself in front of him once more. Klein was satisfied that his summoning wasn't interrupted. He also confirmed that he didn't face any immediate danger. Son, we meet again, he said smilingly using yacht. Derek was shocked by what had happened. He lowered his head. You are a fool who keeps his word. The other members will arrive in a while. Before that, I'll confirm a few things with you first. Klein used the loan language this time, but willed the mysterious space to translate it into yacht. The words rang through the air, coming to Derek in yacht. He asked curiously, what's the matter? Well, now that I've gained a certain degree of mastery over Yachton, the mysterious space above the gray fog can translate whatever I say in real time. This means that I won't have to worry about justice and the hanged man not understanding whatever Sun says. Sigh, why does a boss like me have to work so tirelessly? Klein pinched the bridge of his nose. He laughed and shook his head. TL, permit you to recite my name. Remember the incantations I'm going to tell you. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Derek's pupils constricted when he heard that, but he didn't dare to get distracted. He recited it over and over again in his heart, then confirmed it with the fool. You have to use a simple ritual and recite my name whenever you return to the city of Silver. I will notify you in advance for future gathering. You need not pay too much attention to it on other days, nor do you have to avoid anyone. When you receive my notification, isolate yourself within 1,000 heartbeats. Klein told him the method he had been deliberating on for quite some time. This was essentially a response to a prayer. As he had to consider the situation regarding the city of Silver, as well as save time, Klein opted to omit the other steps of the ritual since it was a plea directed toward him. 1,000 heartbeats. Derek muttered to himself. Klein described the general idea of the tarot club to Derek, then took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Derek froze for a while, instinctively looking at the wondrous item. When 3 approached, Klein extended his hand and pressed on the dark red stars representing justice and the hanged man. Derek didn't blink as he witnessed this. He saw light burst forth opposite and beside him, as 2 hazy figures extended from within. Audrey Hall surveyed her surroundings and froze suddenly. She then heard the ever-calm voice of Mr. Fool. This is our newest member, his code name is Sun. This is Miss Justice, and that is Mr. Hanged Man. Newest member. Audrey was shocked at first, then her shock immediately turned to joy. She was very excited to see the development of the Tarot Club. She felt like a protagonist. Hanged Man Alger creased his brows, a little upset that the Fool would drag in a new member so suddenly. He should have at least mentioned it to us, but a great figure like Mr. Fool wouldn't have to care about our feelings, he thought in exasperation before giving a simple greeting to Justice and Son. In this short process, Audrey entered the her spectator state and paid close attention to the newest member's son. He should be quite young. His body language tells me that he's a little nervous and restrained, but he ultimately maintains a tolerable air of silence, giving the feeling of him a lone wolf. Yes, a lone wolf, Audrey thought as she cast her gaze at the Fool who was seated at the end of the long bronze table. She said, "Enjoy, Mr. Fool. I've collected another 2 pages of Emperor Roselle's diary." Actually, there were 3 pages, but the characters were too complicated and too difficult to memorize. My limit is only a little over 2 pages. I would mess up if I were to memorize more. The rest will have to wait until the next gathering, Audrey added in her head. New pages of Roselle's diary. Klein's mind stirred. He smiled and asked in reply when he already knew the answer, "Miss Justice, what do you need?" Audrey's eyes beamed with excitement, but she replied in a reserved manner, "You know that I'll soon fully digest the spectator potion. I hope that I can get the formula for the telepathist potion so that I can prepare the ingredients ahead of time. I know that there isn't much content for 2 pages of the diary, and it might not equal to the value of the telepathist formula, so I'll give you another page. I'll also pay you a sum of money on the side." She had yet to finish what she said when she suddenly felt that it had come out wrong. She couldn't help but berate herself in her head. Mr. Fool is at the very least an important figure which approaches that of a god. How could he be bought over by money? Hence, Audrey couldn't maintain her spectator state as she hurriedly added with a stammer, "That's not what I meant. Mr. Fool, what I meant is that you can determine the compensation that you'd like." "Yes, that's what I meant. I like your earlier suggestion. I would answer like this. When you have fully digested the spectator potion, you will get the formula you need. I have a subordinate. No, I have to use the word adorer. That sounds more awesome. He happens to be handling some matters that require money, and this is his anonymous account in Backland Bank. Yes, then I will disguise myself and make an anonymous account in Backland Bank." Klein didn't answer immediately, but weighed his words carefully with an unfathomable expression. Backland Bank was one of the 7 major banks in the Loan Kingdom, and as such, it possessed the right to clear transactions. The Loan Kingdom settled accounts with receipts to take care of cash transfer business between banks within the same city in a centralized manner. However, unlike banks in the Intis Republic, not all banks were part of the same league. The biggest 7 banks held on to these rights. Hence, they were called the clearance banks, making other banks rely on them. Transferring money from a different location, on the other hand, could only be done within the same bank. It would be completed by squaring accounts between branches. With the invention of the steam locomotive and telegram, the efficiency of these transfers had been enhanced drastically. Just then the son Derek Berg suddenly spoke. "The telepathist potion formula." Telepathist, that is followed by psychoanalyst. Audrey looked towards him puzzledly. "You know of it?" At the same time, Miss Justice saw a problem through her instinct as a spectator. The young man had used the ancient title psychoanalyst instead of the modern term psychiatrist. "This guy is very strange." Audrey examined Son's every movement. Derek didn't think that he behaved any differently but replied seriously, "I can get you the formula." Then he felt guilty as he couldn't provide it immediately. He tried his best to explain himself. "It's a sequence pathway that stemmed from the dragon race. And our city of Silver was once ruled by the Giant King's imperial household. As you know, the giants and the dragons are sworn enemies. Hence, the city of Silver has all of sequence 9, 8, and 7. I have ways to get them. This kid, I already warned him not to speak carelessly or expose his origin." In the end, Klein nearly wanted to extend his hand to cover his face. Although the son appears to be in great pain, very mature and silent for his age, he's just a boy after all. However, that clarifies one thing for me. It turns out that the spectator sequence's origins stem from the dragon race. It's no wonder that the symbol formed by stars behind Miss Justice's high chair is the dragon. The city of Silver has preserved history well. Klein maintained his posture of leaning against the back of his chair while he listened thoughtfully to the son's description. In fact, he could have easily stopped the son from exposing those matters. As long as he didn't help in the simultaneous translation, Justice and the Hanged Man wouldn't have understood him at all. However, Klein took a different approach. He felt that it might help him consolidate his mighty and mysterious image in the minds of the three members effectively. Hence, he listened with a smile and didn't make a sound. Giant King Dragon raced the City of Silver. Audrey was confused. She first took a look at the Hanged Man opposite her, but she could tell that he was shocked and confused as well from his body language. She looked sideways toward the seat of honor on the long bronze table. She saw the fool sitting on the high chair, engulfed in thick grayish-white fog. His right arm was placed on the armrest, while he leaned sideways leisurely. He showed no shock, no curiosity, no thoughts, and no doubt. He only looked at them with a smile. He knew all of this. Audrey and Alger made the definite judgment almost at the same time. The City of Silver, V never heard of this place, where is it? Audrey probed while Alger listened attentively. At that very moment, Derek Berg's head was filled with questions as well. He could tell that, besides the godlike fool, Justice and the Hanged Man were some sort of beyond. In the forsaken land of the gods, besides the people in the City of Silver, Derek had never seen another living human. So he asked in reply, "If you aren't residents of the City of Silver, which city-state are you from?" Klein couldn't help but wish to sigh again. Audrey trembled her lips, momentarily at a loss for words. Yes, the hidden meaning behind his question is that if you don't want to answer a similar question, don't pry into the questions about where the other person lives. Miss Justice nodded faintly and elegantly kept quiet. Obviously, Alger had misunderstood the son's intentions as well. He didn't know the other person was really just asking straightforwardly. So he kept quiet too. When Derek didn't receive any reply, he seemed to realize what was happening. He didn't bring it up again and instead said, "T will try to get the telepathist potion formula as soon as possible. I would like to use it to exchange for the beginning sequence pathway of the sun." "Sun sequence pathway? Sequence 9 Bard?" Alger asked in reply. Derek thought and said, "Probably, but I lack information about it." Klein, who was watching from the side, decided to get involved, because he didn't want to risk anyone taking his business away. He smiled and said, "I believe Miss Justice doesn't have the Bard formula. But Mr. Hanged Man seems to be able to get it." Seeing Audrey nod, Klein continued with a faint smile, "I will give the sun the Bard formula. The sun will pass the telepathist potion to Miss Justice as soon as possible. Try to get it done within the next 2 gatherings. Miss Justice, please pass me the new pages of Roselle's diary. Then the deal is done." Yes, according to the law of equivalent exchange, the sun is on the losing end of this transaction, but as of now, he has only made a promise. When he really provides the telepathist formula, Miss Justice can consider how to compensate him again, or I will compensate him while Miss Justice provides money to one of my adorers who needs to do something recently. Heh. That's because the sun might not necessarily be able to receive Miss Justice's cash or ingredients as compensation. Klein intentionally added that final statement to redirect the Hanged Man and Justice's focus onto the fact that Sun might not be able to receive her compensation. He also did that to place himself in an unfathomable position. Then, everyone would ignore the adorer that lacked money. Might not necessarily receive the compensation. Where exactly is the sun? The southern continent. Alger suddenly creased his eyebrow. The origin of the sun is mysterious too. As expected, Mr. Fool does have subordinates in reality. Audrey finally saw her hope of becoming a Sequence 8 telepath. What other thoughts could she have? She suppressed her excitement and flashed a faint smile as she said, "I have no objection." "Neither do I." When Derek saw that he could obtain the beginning sequence of the sun pathway, he nodded without hesitation. He couldn't care less about the additional compensation. Alger, who was out of the 3-way deal, didn't have the right to speak. Although he could get the formula of Bard, he would need to wait a week or 2 as well. At that moment, Klein, who had successfully delayed the compensation to the next gathering, or the following one after, pressed his palm forward happily. The Bard formula surfaced. Main ingredients: a crystal sunflower or an adult flint bird's tail feather or a fire bird's tail feather, a piece of siren rock or a singing sunflower. Supplementary ingredients: a blade of midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine juice, a blade of elf dark leaf. He sent the formula before the sun, and saw the young man first crease his eyebrows and then relax. Yes, the ingredients in the forsaken land of the gods will still be known by their ancient name. Luckily, my formula was obtained directly from the eternal blazing sun. The knowledge that I gained used ancient names and various replacements. Klein suddenly cast his eyes of realization towards Miss Justice. Audrey looked at the son who was memorizing the formula. Then she quickly willed the 2 pages of the diary that she had memorized. The diary immediately appeared on the yellowish-brown goatskin, and with a flash, appeared in Klein's hands. Just like before, he started reading immediately. 3rd November, Matilda is 3 months pregnant now. I even find those maidservants who come from the villages beautiful. No, I can't lower my standards. Coincidentally, Countess Flores has invited me to join a private party, he. 8th November, Archbishop Van Esten sought my help. What can I do for an archbishop? 9th November, it turns out that there is actually a secret hidden within Sequence Pathway. Archbishop Esten told me that after becoming a Sequence 5 Beyonder, the rest of the sequences could be replaced with sequences of the same level from 1 or 2 other pathways. In other words, it starts from the mid-sequence to high sequence. But this is only limited between those 1 or 2 pathways. If it's replaced with a potion from a wrong pathway, semi-insanity is the mildest outcome, and one can't advance any further. This way, one can begin substituting pathways from sequence 4 onward. Sleepless and corpse collector pathway. Yes, the Church's savant and mystery prior pathways can also substitute for one another at a high sequence. Cooperation. Some pathways are interchangeable after sequence 5. That's different from what the Nighthawks told me. Isn't it a fact that you cannot change your pathway after you choose one? Wasn't it mentioned that diverging from your pathway would allow one to obtain strange, mysterious powers, but that person would definitely go insane and would never be able to advance. To think that there are some hidden exceptions to this. Klein looked at the diary, his pupils constricting. He didn't think that the Emperor Roselle would spout nonsense about something like this. After all, the surprise in his words were so real. But he didn't assume that the information Emperor Roselle had received was definitely correct. There was also a possibility that he had been lied to, or that he had misinterpreted the information. I will need to verify this. I'll commit it to my memory first, Klein reminded himself, then thought deeply about this. If what Roselle described here turns out to be correct, then the sequence pathways go deeper than what I imagined. It hides many secrets. The complete pathway possessed by the Nighthawks is sleepless. They also possess a relatively complete path in the corpse collector, which they have up to sequence 4. To think that those are interchangeable after sequence 5, the other potion chains they have are even less complete, as some pathways only possess the first sequence. Similarly, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery holds the complete pathway of the savant, and has a relatively complete pathway for the mystery prior. These can also be interchanged at high sequences. Interesting. I wonder which pathway is interchangeable with the seer pathway. The apprentice or marauder that was mentioned by the Emperor. There's a high possibility that the first 5 sequence pathways of the seer pathway would each provide a separate ability, and that these abilities would be combined at sequence 4. At that stage, there should be no way to interchange it with some other potion. Klein retracted his thoughts, once again placing his attention onto the diary. He noticed that, although the 2 diary pages were connected, the content was not in chronological order. The dates belonged to 2 different periods. This could be a mistake made by whoever copied their content. Of April, the relationships between the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, the Church of the Lord of Storms, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom are poor. They see each other as enemies. The Church of the Evernight Goddess is at odds with the Church of the God of Combat from the Fasek Empire. This can be taken advantage of. These are all facts worth considering. 13th April. I participated in an ancient organization's gathering. I never expected them to be members of this organization as well. It sure was frightening to think that the second blasphemy slate was in the hands of this organization. This is the first time I'm seeing this legendary item. Indeed, it was hiding an unimaginable secret, hee. Perhaps there will come a day when I will create a blasphemy slate unique to me. No, a set of them, with each one hiding an ultimate secret. Holy FK, Emperor, why didn't you specify the name of this ancient organization? You're killing me. Perhaps, Roselle had a reason, or didn't dare to write down the name of the organization, even if he was using Chinese. Klein looked at the diary, a little uncomfortable and puzzled. But with this page of the diary, Klein could finally confirm that Emperor Roselle had seen the second blasphemy slate. Furthermore, he created a set of cards after that. Each card represented a pathway to godhood. Yes, that could be the ultimate secret that matches each pathway to godhood. I wonder where that set of 22 cards are now. That ancient organization managed to obtain the second blasphemy slate. Klein's thoughts flowed quickly. But he quickly reined in his thoughts. He shifted his gaze away from the diary and shot it towards the hanged man, justice, and the sun. He smiled and said, "Actually, you didn't need to wait for me. TT's our honor." Alger had already reined in his dissatisfaction as he answered humbly. Audrey thought for a moment before smiling. "Mr. Fool, the open selection of government officials through examinations that you described previously has already garnered the support of the king and the prime minister. It will soon be passed by the House of Lords and the House of Commons and is predicted to be implemented early next year." "TT looks like the king and the prime minister still use their brains," Alger mocked out of habit. "Well, with Benson's intellect and diligence, his grammatical and accounting skills should be passable by early next year. But once it's passed by the two houses, it will definitely be announced widely by the various newspapers. I wonder how long Benson's advantage will last. The earlier the examination, the better, sigh. There's no way Benson can triumph over the elites who graduated from the various universities in such a short period of time. But he need not compete against them. The positions they're fighting for wouldn't be the same. Those people might only have their sights trained on positions such as the cabinet secretary or finance secretary." The silent Klein worried for his brother as he nodded his head with a smile. Audrey straightened her back when she saw the fool's affirmative nod. She said with a smile, "Mr. Hanged Man, you got me to check on something for you previously. I've received an answer. The king has been convinced by the prime minister and won't seek revenge on the Fasek Empire at the East Balam shore for the time being. I think you can now give me the extra payment that you promised me." Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "Miss Justice, thank you for your answer. This eases my concerns over certain things. What kind of extra payment do you want? I'll consider it if it's within reason." Audrey smiled, obviously prepared. "Clues to the psychology alchemists, or clues to the main ingredients of the potion telepathist? Of course, that can wait until after the sun hands the formula over to me." "No problem," Alger said without hesitation. 2 seats away from the hanged man, Derek Berg couldn't understand a single word. He was very confused, feeling that he only understood a few terms, but couldn't string them together to provide any logical sense. A method of selecting officials through examination. King and Prime Minister, House of Lord, House of Commons, East Balam Shore, Fasek Empire, Psychology Alchemy. He understood none of that. Fasek, the root of the word, came from Yat. What connection did it have with the fallen giant king's imperial household? Derek looked at Justice and the hanged man, suddenly having the feeling that they might not come from the same world. Could there be another city-state, or one that had formed a nation, somewhere far away from the city of silver in the cursed land? Derek remained silent and listened on. He had a faint understanding of why the mysterious fool mentioned that he might not be able to receive the monetary compensation Justice was going to give him. To be able to gather people this far away from each other, disregarding the terrifying monsters hiding in the darkness of the cursed lands, the fool might really be a god, an ancient god, he thought. After accomplishing everything that she set out to do, Audrey wanted to become a silent observer, but she suddenly remembered something. She spoke in a hurry. "I recently came into contact with a Beyonder Circle and found out about a powerful person named Mr. A. Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Sun. Do you know of this person's background and identity?" "I don't even know what you're talking about." Derek maintained his silence. "Mr. A. I only know a Mr. Z, with such a similar code name. Could he also be from the Aurora Order?" Klein made a guess, but didn't give an answer. He had to maintain his image and try not to give answers he wasn't confident in. If he had to, he would give a vague description just like a charlatan. Alger looked at the fool and found him calm and unchanging. It was hard to read his true thoughts. Thus, he said in a deliberative tone, "The Aurora Order is at odds with the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, so members of these churches understand the Aurora Order more than any other organization. And I happen to know something about them. You need not explain. I know that you come under the Lord of Storms. Of course, you could be a whistleblower, but Why would there be hatred between the Aurora Order and the three ancient churches? Klein smiled but didn't speak. He looked calmly at the hanged man. Alger knew that he couldn't hide his sequence pathway from the fool, but didn't pay too much attention to it and continued. The Aurora Order has 5 saints and 22 oracles. These oracles use the alphabet as their code names, from Mr. A to Mr. X. They are Beyonders, with the weakest being sequence 7 and the strongest sequence 5. They are all adept at hiding themselves. Should a oracle die, a new oracle will take their place. T cannot guarantee that the Mr. A you spoke of is the Mr. A from the Aurora Order, but there is a good possibility. As for the details of the Aurora Order, I have mentioned that to you before. Audrey nodded, becoming even more cautious of Mr. A. She said, feeling a little pinch in her heart, "Thank you for your answer, Mr. Hanged Man. You need not make a payment anymore." "No, I wish to ask for your help with the answer just now, as well as provide extra compensation," Alger said with a deep voice. "What help?" Audrey asked curiously. Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "I received intelligence that the pirate Kalangos, codenamed Rear Admiral Hurricane, has secretly gone onshore and infiltrated back. I don't know what he's up to, but I hope that you can help me locate his whereabouts. As for whatever happens afterwards, you need not put yourself in danger. Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, one of the 7 great admiral pirates." Audrey widened her eyes, almost unable to maintain her spectator state. What was the thing she wanted to do the most after she became a Bayon? It was, of course, to interact with the people that only existed in the fables of the noble. Yes, he's a sequence 6 Bayonder of the Path of the Sailor, a wind blessed. He also has a miraculous item that could be classified as a sealed artifact. He's quite crafty and cruel. Don't attempt to deal with him, Alger introduced seriously. He suddenly turned to Klein. "Mr. Fool, can I get your adorer to assist me at the critical moment? I would pay a price that interests you." "The only adorer I have is myself," Klein lampooned to ease his emotions as he smiled. "That is built on the premise that my adorer happens to be in back." "All right." Alger retracted his gaze, a little disappointed, but also a little expectant. "What's so special about Kalangos' magical item?" Audrey asked slightly confidently. She considered it carefully, and suddenly realized that she had a decent ability to locate people in back. Firstly, her father was one of the most wealthy, connected, and reputable nobles, while she was quite popular amongst the younger generation too. Hence, in the upper middle class of the society, she had quite a few resources to take advantage of. Secondly, the 2 Bayonders that she knew had their own circles as well. Apprentice Fours was originally a clinical doctor and was now an author. She knew quite a number of people in the literary world and publishing industry, as well as among the middle-class doctors. Arbiter Zio Daracha had helped many middle-lower-class people to coordinate and mediate disputes over a long period of time. She was also quite famous in East Backland Borough among the working class and mafia. She had a lot of hidden channels. Plus, considering the Bayonders that they knew and their circles of influence, their ability to look for a person wasn't to be belittled. Towards Justice's question, Alger answered almost straight away without hesitation or thought. "No one knows the real name of the magical item, but the people who have come into contact with it call it the creeping hunger. Kalangos uses a living person's soul and flesh to satisfy it every other day. Otherwise, it would consume its owner as a replacement. This could be one of the most important clues to seek out Kalangos," Audrey said, creasing her eyebrow. She felt utter discomfort and extreme hatred towards any evil item that desired a living human's fresh blood and soul. Yes, but in a big city with at least 5 million people, a few vagrants going missing wouldn't be noticed, Alger reminded her. Ever since he got his hands on the creeping hunger, Kalangos has been very difficult to deal with. He was originally a wind-blessed. He possesses great Bayonder power in domains related to water, wind, and the weather. But later on, people realized that he could drive his targets crazy, enter the dreams of others, summon light to purify a dead soul, sing to strengthen himself, and change his appearance. There's almost nothing that he can't do, Alger described in detail. We suspect that those are all effects that came from the magical item, creeping hunger. Before he finished sharing, Derek Berg, who had been listening quietly, suddenly blurted, "Shepard." "Shepard?" Sequence 5 of the Secret's Suppliant and Listener Pathway. "Among the 6-member council in the City of Silver, there is a new elder who's a shepherd. Sun had mentioned that she's strong enough to fight against a Sequence 4 expert. Well, an evil spirit of the same grade. Klein's expression changed slightly, but it was covered by the gray fog. Justice wasn't paying any attention to him either. Shepherd, Shepherd, Justice and the Hanged Man asked in unison. One sounded completely confused while the other sounded shocked, as though they had heard the title of Shepherd elsewhere before and knew something about it, but didn't understand the actual situation. Seeing that everyone was staring at him, Derek suddenly panicked a little. No matter how quiet, depressed, and vexed he was a boy after all. He hurriedly explained with a stammer. What I meant was, the traits that the Hanged Man described were like the beyonder power of the Sequence job, Shepherd. Every shepherd can swallow another's soul into their body, including wraiths and evil spirits. They control these souls to do their bidding with a unique method, which allows them to make use of their abilities, just like a god letting his lambs out to graze. Hence, no one knows how many powers a shepherd has. That depends on how many beyonder souls they have swallowed, and that makes them very scary. They're almost like a high-sequence beyonder. However, there are people who suspect that there's a limit to the number of souls that a shepherd can consume and let out to graze, and that the souls inside them could be replaced as well. So that's what being a shepherd means. The sequence pathway that the Aurora Order has in its control is enigmatic. No wonder they worship the true creator. No, the fallen creator. Klein was suddenly enlightened, but he didn't nod, taking on the appearance that he knew so long ago. Meanwhile, he sighed inwardly. Son, you are a boy after all. This is very important information, very important insight. You could have exchanged it for valuable things, but you just revealed it all. Just like that, yes, the ability demonstrated by the magical item Creeping Hunger is similar to Sequence 5 Shepherd. I wonder if other sealed artifacts have the same powers of Beyonder. I wonder which sequence the sealed artifact 2049, the Antigonus family's puppet, resembles. After listening to Sun's explanation, Alger seemed to have sorted out the puzzle in his mind as he nodded in silence. Audrey got even more curious and pressed. Which sequence pathway is Shepherd from? Which number is it? The secret suppliant pathway, Sequence 5. Klein seized the opportunity to answer, so as to demonstrate that he knew everything. Secret suppliant, Aurora Order. Audrey suddenly recalled Mr. A, who was a suspected oracle of the Aurora Order, and she immediately felt heavy-hearted. She started thinking seriously, thinking of what price she could pay in exchange for Mr. Fool to take action and rid off that disgusting fellow effortlessly. However, she couldn't think of anything that would move Mr. Fool into doing so. As expected, a figure akin to a god wouldn't be easily moved. There aren't many things and matters that would garner their interest after all, Audrey sighed. Putting her impulse aside, she nodded to the son gratefully, thanking him for giving them a new perspective on Creeping Hunger, so that they could deal with it more reasonably and efficiently. Mr. Hanged Man, I'm willing to accept the mission, but I can't guarantee if I can find Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Audrey looked opposite her when she spoke. There's no better answer than this. Regardless of your success, as long as you try, I will definitely compensate you with things like secret information or intelligence. And if you succeed, maybe I could provide you the telepathous main ingredients directly. Of course, the prerequisite is that we have to know what it is, Alger promised generously, which was a rare sight. Deal, Audrey pursed her lips and replied with a faint smile. Then, Alger created Kalango's portrait with Klein's permission and assistance. He was one of the 7 major pirate admirals. He had a distinctive broad chin, brown hair tied into a bun at the back of his head like an ancient warrior, and green eyes that seemed to hint at laughter, but were abnormally cold. After they finished their discussion and shared their insights, Klein smiled as he announced the ending of the gathering. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man get up swiftly from their seats and bow, while the sun mimicked their motions, only slower. He pressed forward with his right hand and severed the connection, but he didn't leave immediately. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek looked at his familiar surroundings and glanced outside at the dark sky that had flashes of lightning. He was momentarily thrown into a trance, but he soon jolted to his senses. He searched for goatskin and a quill before writing down the barred formula he memorized. He looked at it several times and was finally certain that there was nothing wrong with it. Derek wasn't worried that possessing the barred formula and becoming a different Beyonder would gain the suspicion of the upper echelons of the City of Silver. This was because, in past exploratory expeditions, members of those elite troops would often collect some formulas, ingredients, and strange artifacts from the monsters in the abandoned and destroyed city. During this process, it was normal that people kept some of the loot privately. As long as it didn't involve anything too important, the captains and higher-ups would tacitly overlook it. Over time, some formulas started going around through non-official channels within the City of Silver. Some became the foundation of strong families, from generation to generation. Things of the dark surrounding the City of Silver were relatively fixed. Some ingredients could be obtained easily, while some could only be encountered if one went far into the cursed land. Putting aside the goatskin, Derek recalled the mysterious fool's instruction. Hence, in his simple bedroom, he lowered his head and simply prayed, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Jotun was a very ancient language. It came equipped with the mystical properties demanded by rituals, prayers, and spell casting. Therefore, Derek didn't need to change the incantations into ancient Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Klein, who was seated at the seat of honor at the long bronze table, suddenly heard prayers reverberating in his ear. He then saw the crimson star that corresponded to sun blinking. He didn't try to touch it, but planned to reply to him 10 minutes before the next gathering so that the City of Silver youth would make preparations to be alone. The most important part was for him to evade the conversion of time and date, to decrease the possibility of damaging Fool's mighty image. After he confirmed that, Klein wrapped himself up with spirituality and stimulated a descent. Returning to his room, Klein removed the spirituality wall and took a break before he got ready to head out again. It wasn't necessary for him to play the role of a seer, and he didn't have to fix his trip to the divination club into his daily schedule. He would only visit occasionally to make some extra pocket money and fulfill his supervision as a nighthawk. Originally, Klein wanted to laze around through the entire afternoon, but he suddenly thought of something that he had yet to do. So he had no choice but to gather himself up. According to his appointment, he had to pay Detective Henry a visit that day and accept the final report about the Red Chimney investigation. "Say, I've heard that the big-timers are all quite busy. I still have to spare some time to go to the Tingen Family Servant Assistants Association with Benson and Melissa to look for a good maidservant." Klein unwillingly changed his shirt, put on his black tuxedo, and held his silk top hat and silver-inlaid cane before walking out the door like a gentleman. At Basic Street, under Henry's private detective company, Klein put on a mask and lowered his hat as he went across the street quickly and entered the stairway.